The Roman Empire might be history's biggest overachiever, but its beginning? A sibling rivalry so brutal it supposedly rewrote destiny. Or at least, that's the lie Rome liked to tell. The truth was far messier, featuring a cluster of muddy villages that somehow snowballed into centuries of conquest, chaos, and collapse. So how do you get from a bedtime story about wolf children to emperors who fought in the arena, taxed urine, and bankrupted their own state? Well, that's the story of Rome. Origins and the Roman kingdom. Two names to kick us off. Romulus, the guy who killed his own brother for prime real estate, and Tarquin the Proud. The king so hated he convinced Rome to ban the monarchy forever. In the 8th century BC, a handful of Latin villages set up shop on the hills by the river Tiber since it offered fertile farmland, was shallow enough to cross and sat close to the sea. Useful, practical, albeit a little dull. Which is probably why later Romans decided to spice it up with a much better origin story. According to them, twin brothers Romulus and Remus were abandoned on the riverbank, rescued and nursed by a she-wolf, and grew up to argue over where their shiny new city should stand. When Remus mocked Romulus's half-built walls by hopping over them, Romulus killed him on the spot. Rome was born out of the chaos, and of course, Romulus got naming rights. While the myth might be a fun anecdote, Rome actually grew under kings. Some Roman, some Etruscan. The last king, Tarquin the Proud's downfall came courtesy of his son Sextus, who snatched a noblewoman named Lucretia, causing outrage amongst the nobles. Led by Brutus, they stormed into action, booted Tarquin out of the city, and banned kings forever. Struggles. Rome wasn't a superpower yet. It was just another scrappy Italian city surrounded by hostile neighbors: Sabines, Etruscans, Gauls. In 390 BC, the Gauls actually sacked the city, leaving a scar Romans never forgot. Impact. That hatred of kings became a national obsession. From now on, Romans would fight civil wars, assassinate rivals, and even invent elaborate titles. Anything to avoid calling someone king. And with the monarchy gone, Rome had to figure out a new way to rule. Unbelievably, it worked. Until it didn't. The Roman Republic and Mediterranean expansion. Two names to watch here. Hannibal, the guy who marched elephants through the Alps just to prove Rome wasn't untouchable, and Scipio Africanus, the Roman who mastered the art of turning disasters into victories. Hannibal humiliated Rome so badly he became the bogeyman of bedtime stories, whereas Scipio flipped the script by taking the war to Carthage. And at Zama, he delivered the mic drop that finally sent Hannibal packing. Significant events. With Tarquin gone, Rome reinvented itself as a republic. No kings, just magistrates, a senate, and a lot of shouting in the forum. In 390 BC, Gauls, a Celtic tribe from modern-day France, burned Rome down, causing a trauma the Romans obsessed over for centuries. Cue the Punic Wars, 3 rounds long, brutal conflicts with Carthage, a North African trading giant and Rome's main Mediterranean rival. The first, 264 to 241 BC, taught Rome how to build a navy from scratch and win Sicily. The second, 218 to 201 BC, gave us the ultimate underdog movie villain, Hannibal. He marched an army, elephants included, over the Alps and absolutely wrecked the Romans at battles like Cannae. Rome's survival came down to sheer stubbornness. Then we get Scipio, who flipped the script by invading North Africa. In 202 BC at Zama, he crushed Hannibal and earned the name Africanus. The Third War, 149 to 146 BC, was less a contest and more a grudge match. Rome burned Carthage to the ground. Struggles. Victory came at a cost. Rome's new empire pumped wealth into the city, but it didn't trickle down. Small farmers lost land to wealthy elites, slave plantations boomed, and inequality exploded. Reformers like the Gracchus brothers tried to fix it, but both ended up murdered by mobs. Rome now had a taste for political violence. Impact. By 146 BC, Rome controlled Spain, Greece, and North Africa. It had gone from scrappy city to Mediterranean superpower. But all that power created new problems. Generals with loyal armies, senatorial corruption, and mobs in the streets. The Republic had solved the king problem only to invent a dozen new ones. And if you think elephants crossing the Alps was dramatic, wait until you see Roman generals marching their legions straight into Rome. The Late Republic and Civil Wars. Step into the spotlight Julius Caesar, the smooth-talking general who crossed the Senate, crossed the Rubicon, and ultimately paid for it in blood. He wasn't just ambitious. He was unstoppable charm wrapped in military genius. To his soldiers, he was a hero. To the Senate, he was a walking red flag. But every victory made him look more like the one thing Rome swore it would never allow again: a king. And in Rome, that was a death sentence. Significant events. Rome's allies were sick of being treated like second-class citizens. They fought the Social War, 91 to 88 BC, and won the right to call themselves Romans. But the real winners weren't the allies, they were the generals. First came Gaius Marius, who reformed the army by letting the poor enlist, turning soldiering into a career instead of a farmer's side hustle. Then came Lucius Cornelius Sulla, who looked at the Republic's "no armies in Rome" rule and stomped all over it by marching his legions in twice, turning civil war into standard practice. And while Rome tore itself apart, a gladiator named Spartacus decided he was done entertaining crowds. He led a slave rebellion that ran circles around Rome for 2 years. When it finally ended, 6,000 rebels were crucified along the Appian Way as a very on-brand Roman warning. By the 60s BC, 3 big egos ran the show: Pompey the Great, Rome's golden boy general; Marcus Crassus, the rich banker; and Julius Caesar, the smooth-talking up-and-comer who wanted it all. Together, they formed the First Triumvirate, a power-sharing deal the Senate hated but couldn't stop. Caesar wasted no time. From 58 to 50 BC, he steamrolled Gaul, came home loaded with cash, and had an army that loved him more than the Republic. Ordered to stand down, he instead crossed the Rubicon, a small river in Italy, and made civil war official. Pompey bolted for Egypt, where he was promptly stabbed. Caesar returned as dictator, rewrote the calendar, stacked the Senate with his pals, and started looking suspiciously like a king. That was a problem. In March 44 BC, a gang of senators led by Brutus and Cassius decided to fix it with knives. On the Ides of March, they stabbed Caesar to death, thinking they had saved the Republic. They hadn't. Struggles. Instead of saving Rome, they lit the fuse. Brutus and Cassius fled east, but Caesar's fans were faster. His teenage heir Octavian, his old wingman Mark Antony, and the human afterthought Lepidus formed the Second Triumvirate and swore revenge. They crushed the so-called liberators at Philippi, then immediately turned on each other. Antony fell head over heels for Cleopatra, Queen of Egypt. Octavian spun it as Antony betraying Rome for love and luxury. Civil war followed again. In 31 BC, Octavian's fleet wrecked Antony and Cleopatra at Actium. The star-crossed pair killed themselves, leaving Octavian the last man standing. Impact: Octavian rebranded as Augustus, Rome's first emperor. On paper, the Republic still existed, but everyone knew the truth. Rome had traded senators for Caesars. And the emperors to come? Some ran the empire, some ran it into the ground, and one even tried to make his horse a senator. The early empire, Julio Claudians and Flavians. Meet the emperors who defined Rome's early drama. Caligula, the golden boy who spiraled into cruelty and tried to turn his horse into a statesman, and Vespasian, the no-nonsense general who funded the empire by putting a price tag on public toilets. One showed how power could rot a ruler from the inside out. The other proved Rome sometimes just needed a practical man with a sense of humor, even if it smelled a little. Significant events. From 27 BC, Augustus laid the foundations: peace, stability, and more propaganda than a modern election campaign. His heir Tiberius was competent but gloomy, eventually retreating into exile and letting paranoia do the ruling for him. Then came Caligula, who began as the golden boy but soon veered into cruelty and bizarre stunts. Ancient gossip insists he pampered his horse like a senator in waiting. After his assassination, Claudius, mocked for his limp and stammer, shocked everyone by becoming an effective emperor, even pulling off the conquest of Britain. Nero followed, and history never forgot him. He blamed Christians for the Great Fire of Rome, built himself a golden palace, and turned the empire into his personal stage show until rebellion closed the curtain. In 68 AD, Nero killed himself and Rome spun into the Year of the Four Emperors. In the space of a single year, 4 different generals claimed the throne until Vespasian came out on top. He launched the Colosseum project while his son Titus oversaw disasters like Pompeii's eruption in 79 AD. Their dynasty closed with Domitian, who demanded to be called Lord and God, until his own court decided they'd had enough and stabbed him in 96. Struggles. Emperors could build peace or breed paranoia. Nero staged persecutions, Domitian bullied senators, and no one ever knew if the next heir would be a statesman or a sideshow. Impact. For all the drama, Rome grew stronger. The Colosseum rose, the empire expanded, and the system proved it could survive even terrible rulers. But the real golden age was still to come. The apex of empire, Nerva to Commodus. Welcome to Rome at full throttle, an empire so massive it swallowed everything from Britain's rainy bogs to Mesopotamia's burning deserts. The headliners? Trajan, the war machine who maxed out Rome's borders and left maps gasping for space, and Commodus, the spoiled heir who thought he was Hercules reincarnated and treated the Colosseum like his personal cosplay arena. One pushed Rome to its peak, the other turned it into a circus act. Significant events. It all began with Nerva in 96 AD, who pulled off a genius move. Instead of leaving power to a useless relative, he adopted a competent heir. That habit gave Rome the 5 good emperors. First came Trajan, who stomped Dacia, stripped its gold mines, and pushed the empire to its biggest size ever. Next, Hadrian, part tourist, part control freak, who built Hadrian's Wall to mark Rome's limit in Britain and spent his reign touring provinces like an imperial rock star. Antoninus Pius followed with a long, peaceful reign so uneventful it's almost suspicious. Then came Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher king who wrote Stoic wisdom by candlelight, while Germanic tribes hammered the borders and plague emptied the streets. Then we meet Commodus, Marcus's son, who trashed the whole legacy. He dressed up as Hercules, fought in the Colosseum against half-armed opponents, and even renamed Rome after himself. In 192, his enemies strangled him in the bath. Not exactly a heroic ending for a wannabe demigod. Struggles. For all the glory, Rome's borders never stopped bleeding, and plague hollowed out its strength. Marcus Aurelius' death ended a century of stability, and Commodus proved just how fast things could go wrong. Impact. The 5 good emperors showed Rome at its best. Commodus showed how quickly it could unravel. And the chaos that followed, it would make Commodus look tame. Crisis and upheaval, the 3rd century. Rome hits rock bottom, and an empire so unstable, it changed rulers faster than gladiators changed weapons. Spotlight on Valerian, the unlucky emperor captured alive and downgraded to Persia's personal footstool, and Aurelian, the iron-fisted soldier who clawed Rome back from the brink and earned himself the title Restorer of the World. One became a cautionary tale, the other a one-man rescue mission. Significant events. After Commodus' disaster, the throne became a revolving door. Emperors rose and fell at sword point. The low point came in 260 AD, when Emperor Valerian marched against Persia's Shapur I and ended up captured alive. Legend says Shapur mounted his horse using Valerian's back as a step, and after his death had him flayed and stuffed. Romans never forgave the humiliation. Meanwhile, the empire itself shattered. A breakaway Gallic empire controlled Gaul and Britain in the west, while Queen Zenobia ruled a flashy Palmyrene empire in the east. The so-called Roman core was left clinging to Italy and the Balkans. Then came Aurelian, 270 to 275 AD. Nicknamed Restorer of the World, he hammered invading Germanic tribes, crushed Zenobia's empire, reabsorbed the Gallic rebels, and even threw up the massive Aurelian walls around Rome itself. His reign ended with assassination naturally, but he proved Rome wasn't finished yet. Struggles, civil wars, endless invasions, plague, and an economy in freefall nearly killed the empire. Coins lost value, trade dried up, and the borders collapsed like wet parchment. Impact. Rome survived by the skin of its teeth. The takeaway was brutal but clear. Only strong autocratic emperors could hold the mess together. And one man, Diocletian, was about to make that official. The Late Empire and Rise of Christianity. Two names that rewrote Rome's rulebook: Diocletian, the micromanaging control freak who thought endless paperwork, new borders, and even price tags could glue the empire back together. And Constantine, the high-stakes gambler who saw a glowing cross in the sky, rolled the dice on Christianity and walked away with a brand new world religion. One tried to save Rome with rules, the other with faith. And together, they flipped the script on what the empire even meant. Significant events. Diocletian looked at the crumbling empire and decided one man couldn't handle it. His solution? The Tetrarchy. 4 emperors running the show at once. He bulked up the army, split provinces into smaller units, and taxed everything that moved. He even launched the Great Persecution of Christians by burning churches and banning worship, but the faith only spread faster. Then, in a plot twist no one saw coming, Diocletian actually retired, spending his days gardening while the empire tore itself apart without him. Enter Constantine. After years of civil war, he clawed his way to sole power. Legend says he saw a glowing cross in the sky with the words, "In this sign conquer," so he did just that. He legalized Christianity in 313 and later founded Constantinople, a flashy new Rome on the Bosporus. By the end of the century under Theodosius I, Christianity wasn't just legal, it was the official religion. Pagan temples closed, sacrifices stopped, and even the Olympic Games got the axe. Rome was still Rome, but it was playing by a brand new rulebook. Struggles, heavy-handed reforms, crushed peasants, Constantine's heirs squabbled like toddlers with swords, and Emperor Valens handed out a stunning victory at Adrianople in 378, where he was killed and 2/3 of his army wiped out. Impact. Rome was now Christian, centralized, and increasingly ruled from the east. The empire had changed forever, and in the west, the endgame was beginning. Decline and fall of the Western Empire. The final act star Alaric, the Gothic warlord who shocked the world by storming into Rome and looting the Eternal City, and Odoacer, the battle-hardened mercenary who pulled the plug on the Western Empire by firing its last teenage emperor and sending Rome into early retirement. One cracked the city's aura of invincibility, the other signed its death certificate. Significant events. After 395, the empire was permanently split, east and west. The east, with its rich cities and solid defenses, held steady. The west, not so much. In 410, Alaric's Goths marched into Rome and looted it. The first time in 800 years the Eternal City had fallen. Shock rippled across the world. The Vandals piled on, seizing North Africa and then sacking the city again in 455. Attila the Hun, the warlord who terrified Europe so badly that even the Pope begged him to leave, stormed into Gaul and Italy before finally being beaten back. By 476, the Western Empire was a hollow shell. Enter Odoacer, a Germanic general leading Rome's own mercenaries. He deposed the teenage emperor Romulus Augustulus, a boy with the most unfortunate name in Roman history, and packed off the imperial regalia to Constantinople. The Western Empire was officially done. Struggles. The West bled out from barbarian invasions, bankrupt coffers, and emperors so weak they were basically mascots. Real power belonged to generals and mercenaries, until even they decided they didn't need an emperor anymore. Impact. Western Rome collapsed into a patchwork of barbarian kingdoms, but its laws, Latin language, and culture dug in deep. The Eastern Empire carried on for another 1,000 years, until 1453. Calling itself Roman the whole time. Rome fell, but its shadow never left. So Rome, The empire that began with a myth about a wolf and a murderous sibling ended with a teenager named Little Romulus being booted off the throne. In between were centuries of conquest, corruption, emperors gone mad, and reforms that changed the world. Until next time, stay curious, stay kind, and remember, never let your brother near your walls. It might cost you an empire.